I am delighted. I feel like I've known this person for years, and I've only known her for a few weeks. But I'm delighted to introduce my podcast with Cami Richardson. The purpose of these podcasts is to talk to great leaders, people who have made changes in the world. And Cami is certainly at the top of that list on courage, bravery, charisma, and many other wonderful qualities. And it's been really a delight getting to know her. And I think you're going to really enjoy her story. So, Cami, tell everybody your given name, the name your parents gave you 67 years ago.
Well, first off, thanks, Craig, for having me. It's an honor, and I look forward to our conversation today. My official name, and still my legal name, is Thomas Michael Richardson, although everybody does call me Cami at this point. It's not a dead name yet, but someday I'll go through the process to do that. I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, upstate. It's about 60 miles north of New York City, to an Italian mother who came over on the boat when she was 11 years old, and an Irish father, so an Italian Irishman, and proud. I grew up as a Catholic, and I was a good Catholic, in fact, for many years, and that's probably what has caused some of the confusion and delay in me getting to a point where I've transitioned.
And in fact, your dad was a World War II veteran, if I recall correctly.
He was. In fact, he was a gunner in a B-17, is it, or over in the South Pacific. He kind of held that information from us for almost his entire life. And I remember him when he was old and he was in his 80s. We were sitting down looking at old books of his, and we got talking about World War II. And, I said, well, Dad, you've always been really quiet about that. What did you do? And he finally opened up to me about what he did in the service. And I think being a very devout Catholic, in fact, he founded, along with some other very strong Catholic, a new Catholic church called St. Martin de Porres. And I think his religion ultimately kept him from sharing his story, in that he flew 19 missions, I think he said, and I'm sure he shot down planes, and it wasn't something that he felt good about. He just did it because he had to do it. My mother was a real character. She came over on the boat when she was 11 years old, and she was a little Italian lady who loved to cook Italian food. And, we were pretty strict about what we ate on Fridays and things like that. Went to church every Saturday for confession. And I, in fact, was an altar boy for many, many years at St. Martin de Porres Church.
And so just to give everybody the big picture frame of reference, you're 67 years old today, or not, it's not your birthday, but you're 67. And you came out to the public, and we'll get into a little bit about when you came out with your wife, Terry, and other aspects, but you came out to the public when you were 62. Is that correct?
60, correct.
63.
It was 5 years ago yesterday. Yesterday was a Transgender Day of Visibility, which in our community is like a holiday. And it was appropriate that I came out on that day. We had a big party at my house. We invited a number of our friends. They were unaware as to what the conversation or why we were having the party. And I can distinctly recall calling them all into our family room and grabbing Terry and holding her hand. And I honestly think that everybody thought we were going to tell them we were divorcing, but I broke this news to them. And I was kind of a metrosexual, I guess you could say. For many years before that, I shaved my body hair, and I dyed my hair, and I even went as far as later on when I approached finally telling people that I would even wear eye makeup. So a lot of people had a sense that I was a little bit off kilter, so to speak, but so it wasn't a complete shock, although it was something that most people are like, oh my gosh, and what does this mean? And so I walked my way through it with them, and at the end of the conversation and speech, they all came up to me and gave me a big hug, and Terry, and wished us well. And for the most part, most of them have all remained our friends. I can recall one good friend who owns a couple of restaurants here in Park City, who is a conservative and who, really didn't understand this, called me the next day and he said, Tom, I want to ask you a bunch of questions. So can you meet me at the Boneyard tomorrow? He owns the Boneyard. And sure enough, he had spent that Sunday looking at his computer and finding out about transgenderism. And he was very pointed in his questions. But I think when he was done, he helped himself and learned a lot in the process. And as you know, that is, I've adopted that as my personal mission in life, which is to help enlighten and educate people about the transgender community by being myself, by being out in the public domain and spreading a smile. So yeah, it's been an interesting 5 years.
Yes, I'd say so. And I've witnessed that in action, and I can vouch for the efficacy of you as a representative of the trans community, a wonderful representative. And I think in part that's what I hope we accomplish through this podcast. One of the things is to have people understand what it means to be trans, what it doesn't mean to be trans, the challenges that you faced both before you came out. And so we'll get into those in a little bit. I mean, you were let's just say a man's man. I mean, you were a college basketball player at a wonderful program, Marist. You graduated from college not long after that, became a firefighter in New York, right? And talk a little bit about, balancing that very masculine world of athletics and firefighting with your trans feelings, which really started, if I recall correctly, when you were 8 years old, right?
Yeah. When I was 8 years old, and this is humbling, and it's a little embarrassing, but it's part of my story. I used to wear my mother's clothes. I knew where her stockings were and her bra, and when I had the opportunity to dress, I would do that. And obviously, being a good Catholic and not even having a clue as to the word transgenderism, it was baffling to me. I didn't understand why I had these desires and feelings. And it continued for the next 55 years or 54 years of wearing women's clothes when I could, and, being, embarrassed about it, but confused and not really knowing where to go for an answer. That was not something back in the 60s that you went to your priest about or confessed, in the confessional. I just hid it. And I hid it for many years when I was a teenager. I can remember actually buying a pair of fake nails, press-on nails. And my mother was like, the chief detective. She could see and find anything and everything. So I actually, I don't know what I was thinking, but I hid it in her drawer, at the bottom of her drawer, with all her makeup and combs and brushes and things like that. And I don't know what I was thinking, but she never said a word about it. And I don't even know if she ever really knew what I was doing behind closed doors. She might have, but she didn't say anything. And that's probably not surprising, because a lot of times parents, don't want to believe what they've seen, and they try to just mask it over. And that's typical in the gay community as well. And I did go to college and lived at home, which still gave me that wonderful opportunity. And then I did become a paid firefighter. I was a volunteer at first, and then I became a paid fireman. And I wound up, having a great career there. But I can recall at times wearing women's undergarments underneath my blue work uniform and, taking that risk of potentially getting hurt and, being exposed and what would people say? And, as you said, I was kind of this macho firefighter and had a great firefighting career and, had some great stories from my firefighting years, including when I was home one night. And we used to receive the calls over what was called a plectron. It was a beeping thing, and then a dispatcher would come on and tell you where the fire was. And it happened to be at a motel on the main drag in Poughkeepsie, Route 9, right by the IBM main plant. And I was familiar with the building. I pulled into the scene right away. And my brother, who was the captain at the time of the volunteer company, I was a paid fireman, he looked at me and he said, "Tom, grab somebody and there's someone trapped up on the second floor." And those are the days when, nowadays safety in the fire department is of utmost significance. And back in those days, we weren't as cautious, but we did have a Scott pack on, which was a breathing device. And myself and another guy who happened to be a good friend climbed up a staircase, and on our fours, because it was smoky and hot, we went into a burning building, a burning room, and there was a woman standing at the window tying bed sheets together to use to get down from the second floor. And I looked at her and I said, "All right, ma'am, come with us." And I was prepared to share my Scott pack air with her. And she looked at me and she said, "It's about time you blankers got here." And quite the response that I expected from her. I didn't give her the option of saying, "Well, you can either do your window or come down with us." And we managed to sneak our way back down before the fire engulfed the second floor and saved her life. And I received my first medal of, for saving someone, which was, it's a thrill and it's exciting and it really makes you appreciate what you've done in that occupation. And I love being a fireman. I could go on and on and on and tell you stories. And I know you're aware of one, which was I organized a trip to Lake Placid in 1980 to be a firefighter for the Olympics. The word had gotten out in the newspaper that the chief up there was looking for someone. I wrote him a note right away. He got back with me, and I put together myself and 8 other guys, and we went to the Olympics and served as volunteer firemen. We weren't getting paid, but we were able to get access to virtually all the sporting events that we wanted to go to. And
there was a big game at that Olympics, if I recall correctly.
There was an important game. It was the USA played the Soviet Union in the semifinals, and we kind of pulled a quick one to get in. We had gotten a pass. It was a green pass with our photo, and that allowed us access to virtually any sporting event that was being held. But they announced in advance that if you think you're going to go to that game, it's too crowded, sold out, you cannot go to the game. And you would need, anybody who does go needs a special purple ticket. Well, we tried to get a purple ticket. They wouldn't give it to us. But they kind of erred in that they were allowing people earlier in the day with a purple ticket and a green pass to go into the stadium. So we got our purple ticket, and myself and 2 other good friends, we wanted to go to the game. And so out of the 9 of us, 3 of us, dressed in our blue uniforms with our hat and a radio that literally was sticking on our lapel, but went into our shirt and didn't go to anything. There was no radios to connect to. And we went up to the Pinkerton guards, and I went to him, and I remember vividly saying, "We're in fire watch in section 32. And he looked at us, and we looked official, and he goes, "Okay." And we go up to the second floor, same thing. We get through, and the next thing you know, we're in the stadium. We're up on the upper deck, and the game starts. And we get all the way through the second period, and it's the intermission between the second and third. And we are literally hanging on the rafters trying to get a view of the game. And this New York State trooper came up to me and he goes, what are you guys doing? You know, he was kind of mad at us, right? And I told him we were on fire watch, which he quickly said, yeah, that's not true. And I said, all right. Well, I said, we're here. We're watching the game. Please don't let it kick us out at this point. And he let us stay. He just told us to get down. And the USA wound up winning the game 4-3 in what was probably one of the most thrilling sporting events. In fact, it's been rated the number one most thrilling sporting event.
That's unbelievable. Nobody saw that game unless you were in the arena because it was delayed. I remember watching it on a delay. Yeah. I can remember. And I remember, of course, Al Michaels' Do You Believe in Miracles call. But the most iconic, because the Soviet Union, of course, they were all pros. And the United States were all these college kids. And they had no chance to win. Nobody gave them a chance. And, you were about to say you remember what happened after.
Oh, I still get chills. I'm getting chills just by talking about it. That's the excitement level of that game. You know, we all left the stadium and it was kind of up on a hill, and we all ran down onto the main street, and we were drinking and partying and having a great evening. And I went to a phone booth and I called my wife, and the game happened. I kind of ruined it for her because I go, the USA won, and she was like, what are you telling me now for? Yeah.
That's great.
It was a thrilling event that I'll never forget. And that was the fun side of being a fireman. And, there was always the serious side. I delivered a baby one time in an ambulance, racing to the hospital, I'll never forget, by myself in the back of these old Cadillac ambulances that we had. And I can recall being pretty calm when I first started the conversation because they got the tape for me and I could hear it back. Ambulance 2's coming in with a, 30-year-old woman, contractions are 3 minutes apart. And, I said, should we proceed in? And the emergency room doctor said, yes, keep coming in, because we were only 5 minutes away. Well, 2 minutes in, she looks at me and she said, I've got to deliver this baby now. And I had a choice, either do it or put my foot up there and try and stop it. So I chose the correct way, and I grabbed the medical equipment I need and delivered the baby. But the whole time I had the phone literally on my shoulder as I'm talking to the hospital to make sure I'm doing things correctly. Because you can practice all you want, but until the real thing happens, it's quite different.
Time. Wow.
And it was fun, and I delivered the baby, cut the cord, and I can recall the nurses and doctors all opening up the back door and cheering for me, and so it was my first one. I delivered a second one later on, but I got a call the next day from the woman who gave birth, and she was very thankful, of course, and she said that they've decided to name the baby after me. And this was an Asian family with the last name of Chong. And my name at the time was Tommy. So there is a guy running around there named Tommy Chong.
Nice.
Got it. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
It's not that Tommy Chong, no.
No.
So,
not of Chi-Chan Chong.
Right. So it was a great career. I rose to the rank of municipal training officer, which really was a perfect way to segue into what I'm kind of doing now, which is being a vocal voice for the transgender community. I would give training lessons and work with the firefighters.
Okay, I want to go back a little bit. So you're an 8-year-old boy. You've secretly started to try on your mom's clothing, but you're this athlete, were you picked on? Did people call you feminine when you were growing up at all, or any of that?
No. There wasn't much bullying back in those days, and because I was an athlete and I did like women, I'm still heterosexual. It didn't appear to anyone that I had this secret fetish, and thank God. You never know what could have happened, but I know what didn't happen, which was no one ever knew. I never got caught. How I never got caught, I'll never know, but I did make it through all those years.
Did you ever have a moment where you got close to somebody, a friend, and you wanted to tell them, just get it off your chest? Were you ever tempted? But I mean, of course, we'll get to when you talk to Terry about it, but I'm talking about when you were growing up and young adult.
No, because I honestly did not understand what it was. I mean, for all I knew, every boy had that same kind of interest.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was really talked about or, really written about. And honestly, I don't think I even understood the word transgender. I mean, I can remember at a point hearing the word transvestite. Quite honestly, that word scared me. It had a negative connotation. And I knew that if you were out on the streets and people were calling you a transvestite, that probably didn't bode well for you, especially growing up in Poughkeepsie, New York, which, was kind of a blue collar city north of the city. So, no, I didn't have any issues really with any of that. I was, like you said, I was really athletic, played a lot of sports in high school, dated girls, started dating in college, one of my high school classmates, and we wound up getting married. But my dressing did not stop. And when I had the chance at home to wear her clothes, I did. I do recall at times she questioning why her bra size, seemed to be stretching, or, things might have been out of place and everything. But, I managed to get my way out of it and never told her about it. So, yeah, it continued and it went on. And that was till I was, close to, let me think here, when did I marry? I was married for 16 years to her. So, in the early 90s is when we started to have difficulties in our marriage, and we wound up separating and ultimately divorcing. And then I met my current wife, Terry, and we just celebrated our 28th anniversary over the weekend. And she's an amazing woman. And, back in those days, it was probably the only time that I didn't have a strong desire to wear women's clothes. And I think the reason was she's a beautiful woman. I would see her doing her makeup and I would see her, how she dressed. And it was kind of meeting my feminine desires and needs, if you can understand that. I didn't have this strong desire to wearing her clothes. And I also wound up in a position as my career in the ski industry took off. I wound up being extremely busy in the ski industry, growing a company and ultimately taking it public. And, that kept me kind of out of trouble, so to speak,
Yeah, that's a good segue. So you're a successful firefighter, but you've got this accounting and financial background and you became a very successful businessman, as you say, ultimately becoming chief financial officer when you were Tom of American Ski Company, which bought the canyons here in Park City and owned a number of very prominent ski resorts. Was it the first publicly traded ski company?
Yes. We were kind of in competition constantly with Vail Resorts, which now is the largest ski holding company in the country. But we were really the first. We started the first joint pass that could be used at any of the resorts. And We grew the company rapidly from 1993 right through 1997, I guess it was. We acquired like 10 ski resorts all over the country on the East Coast and the West Coast. And I was directly involved in the purchase of the canyons here in Park City. Raised, I think it was like $60 million to help fund the improvements and the purchase. And then at the same time, I was negotiating a big deal with the Komori company out of Japan. And they owned Steamboat in Colorado and Heavenly in California. So I was negotiating with them. And at the same time that we were finalizing the deal for the canyons, we wound up buying Steamboat and Heavenly for $280 million. But we needed to raise $280 million. And that resulted in us working with New York Wall Street bankers and ultimately taking the company public back in 1997, which was an amazing experience for anyone, especially for someone who, 13 years earlier was, working as a firefighter in New York. And, the next thing you know, my career took off and I was in a position to be that involved in taking a company public, serving on the board and dealing with analysts, all of which were, all new to me and exciting. And it was like a crazy time in my life. And that's why ultimately I didn't have much of an opportunity to dress in a feminine way. And, so it was on the back burner. And that was, to some degree, like most transgender people, ultimately, you go through stops and starts. It's like a drug almost in that you want to stop. You really don't think that this is the right thing to be doing. And it adds that level of confusion. So I did. I stopped for a long time. And then ultimately, once my career in the ski industry ended, I managed to cash out my stock options and did very well. And, I wound up starting to work with my wife, owning various businesses, and it included a bed and breakfast on Martha's Vineyard and a garden nursery center on Martha's Vineyard and a bead shop. And I kind of did a lot of different things from like 2000 right up until 2014. I owned numerous businesses, some good, some bad. Had my hits and I had my misses like a lot of people.
Yeah.
Did very well in the real estate market back in the mid 2000s. I was flipping houses down in Florida and kind of building on that. But ultimately, even that came to a crashing halt in 2008 when the recession hit. And, I found myself owning a house in Park City and a house on Martha's Vineyard and a house in Sarasota, Florida, all of which are beautiful and were beautiful and fun. And we were gypsies. We literally, with our businesses, thanks to a phone, we were traveling around the country, going from one property to the next and just loving our life and living and managing our businesses. And it was quite an exciting time. Being an entrepreneur is really fulfilling. It can be also, it can be scary and, you're putting your money at risk and it's your money. But when it does work, it feels good. For example, I did the first affordable housing project on Martha's Vineyard, which started like in 2003 and wound up building 12 different units, some, affordable housing units and some higher end units. But it was a mix of buildings that ultimately all sold right before the recession, thank God. And, I did extremely well on that project. So things were really moving along. But it came to 2008, and I found myself while working as an entrepreneur, mainly from home, wherever that home happened to be at that moment, I found myself going back to wearing women's clothes. And, my wife was my main feeder of clothes. Also did kind of at times say, how come this doesn't seem right? Were you wearing this? And, I would kind of lie and say, no, of course not. But finally in 2009, I made a big decision. I realized it could also be the end of our relationship, but I also knew her pretty well, and I knew what kind of person she was. And, although it could have easily went the other way, I had some confidence that she would understand. It wasn't easy for her, nor is it easy for any transgender person to tell their spouse what their desires are. But I also knew that it wasn't full time, just dressing around the house. And if she and I wanted to go out, we would go to Salt Lake. We wouldn't go to the Park City area. And we would just, I would dress and we would go out for the evening and come home and take it all off. And that routine went on for quite a while. And
you basically, you made a deal with Terry that you would be Tom to most everybody, and this really carried on until 2016, but that you would have nights where you could be Cami and you could go out and you could dress. So talk a little bit, I've got so many questions I want to follow up on, but talk a little bit about how you thought about coming out to family. You have two beautiful daughters from your first marriage, and I know those were difficult conversations. Talk about, some of the positive experiences in coming out, and talk about some of the really challenging experiences when you came out.
Well, I think the good news is that when I did tell my two daughters, and it was separately, they understood, both of them. They reacted rather favorably, and they didn't have any, they had questions and concerns and, well, what does this mean? And my one daughter had two children at the time who were like 7 and 5, somewhere in that range. And, she didn't feel that they would understand why grandpa is now going to become grandma. And so at their decision and choice, we held off telling them for 2 years. But my son-in-law and my daughter both were very accepting, confused. They had a lot of questions, how could this be and how long has it been going on? And, that's at a point in time where you're extremely humble and you have to face the truth of what you're looking at and what you're doing. And I was, and my daughter from Boston, she was also very accepting. So it went well with my two daughters. My wife's family was, slightly, well, my family, my sister and younger brother were really fine about it. They completely understood. They immediately embraced me as Cami. My older brother took a little while. He was a firefighter with me, kind of a rough and tough New Yorker. And, I think he struggled with it, and I think he still does struggle with it. I think it's just hard for him to accept who I've become. But, that's not unusual in families to have some good and some people feel it's not a good thing. My wife's brothers and families both, without getting into a long story, did not accept this at all. They thought that I deceived Terry when I married her, which was not the case. In retrospect, should I have told her about my dressing before I married her? Yeah, maybe. I'll admit that, it was something that I knew I had been doing. And, if I was really telling her everything that, about me, I probably should have told her. But I also didn't have this feeling of, well, I need to dress anymore. So I didn't. And, I didn't tell her, and her brothers felt like there was some deception, which I had some issues with. And it's taken until this past Christmas for them to finally come out and have some level of acceptance. We did a Zoom call, and things, I think, are back heading in the right direction, although they've never actually seen me in all those years. Her mother, on the other hand, and her father subsequently passed away. Both of them were completely against this. And it's, was, when I look back on it, they're very conservative Republican. They older. I don't think they even understood what being transgender meant. So there was a level of rejection there that still remains to this day. And it's probably the biggest emotional issue that I have is I really want to get to know my mother-in-law again as Cami, and she's just not accepting and not willing to do that. And I hope that before she passes away, I have that opportunity. And it's, if I have one long-term desire and goal, it's to give her a hug again, tell her I love her.
Yeah. Was anybody surprised among the people closest to you? Not surprised when you came out? Did anybody say, I could have kind of figured that out?
Yeah. Some people at that party, came up to me and said, we thought you were just a metrosexual. We didn't know to what degree you were, doing things. And, what I had ultimately started to do after I told Terry is I got attending a big transgender outing in Las Vegas with over 150 girls like myself that would go, and it's more of a social thing. It wasn't something that we were learning how to, do makeup tutorials and things like that. It was, let's just go, have fun, get together. And so I got involved in that in a big way, and I got more and more involved, and now I'm actually one of two of the lead organizers of the event. And that ultimately was kind of a stepping stone towards coming to some realities about who I am, because I was more of a cross-dresser, in my opinion, and I wound up, questioning why so many people who were cross-dressers ultimately went through the transition, perhaps even, surgeries to transition full time. And I honestly thought I can't do that. I'm Tom. I've got this career. I had businesses going like crazy, and it was scary to me, and it was something that, although I thought about, I had convinced myself I couldn't do it until Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner, in 2015 came out publicly, and I heard her story, saw her story, and I said to Terry, I need to go see a therapist and find out what's going on here, because I have the same strong desires that she does. And in going through a therapist, which I highly recommend for people for any reason, if you have questions about, yourself and your life, they can be helpful. And I went through some months of introspection and understanding of myself. And ultimately, after a period of time, she looked at me and she said, okay, there's no reason for me not to tell you that I believe you are transgender. And so the question is, now what are you going to do? And I didn't know, and I went back home and I sat Terry down and I told her what I had been told. And I said, how do you feel about me, doing this full time? And, again, one of those monumental stepping stones on the journey that, with her permission, I ultimately began that process. Although I was working at the Jewish Temple in Park City as the executive director, and it was a Reformed Jewish temple and just great congregants. And but I still always had a concern about, if I transition while here, is it going to ultimately cause some of the congregants to leave? And that's a source of revenue for the temple, and certainly I didn't want to negatively impact it that way. But I wound up doing a radio interview for the local radio station here in Park City, and the president happened to be listening to the radio interview, and it was purposefully blind in that my name was not used. I was Cami, but she recognized my voice, And she immediately called me up and she said, well, Tom, Cami, what do you want to do here? And she said, we're Reformed Jews. We accept this completely. If this is something you want to do, let's do it. And went to the board meeting and they all agreed and went to work the next day as Cami and never have looked back. And, it clearly has been one of those monumental moves in my life.
Yeah.
And it just kind of worked its way through. I didn't do anything irrational, but it was exciting to come out as Cami full time. And ultimately, I retired from the temple, started to write my memoir, which is called Do You Know Who I Once Was? ? And it's on Amazon. And it's a great book, and it's kind of an interesting story. The title is Do You Know Who I Once Was? And obviously that would think, especially when you look at the pictures on the front of me as Tom and me as Cami, it implies that, I've transitioned. But it's also about my careers, I tell about my firefighting days. I tell a lot of stories about my ski career, and then ultimately getting to a point where I transitioned to Cami and the experience of going through that. So I think people would find the book really interesting. It's funny at times, but I think I've had many, I don't know if you told me this, but many people tell me that they just cry, because there are moments in the book where, I'm being truthful and I'm being humble, and I'm trying to tell people what it was like, what it's like to be rejected. The night when we were in Florida and her parents lived 40 miles up the road, and so Terry would go and see them without me. And we get a call and Terry looks at me and she said, Dad just passed away, and so I gave her a big hug, and, we talked about what we needed to do, which drive up to her mother's house. And, it's interesting, on the way up, I'm thinking, gosh, I haven't seen her, and, what's going to happen? And so sure enough, we pull up into the driveway. She's just getting out of the car, having come from the hospital, and Terry runs up to her mother, and I didn't. I sat back in the car and realized she doesn't want me to acknowledge this. And, that was one of those moments in life where it was painful, really painful. And I cried. And
yeah, it is a beautiful book. I've read it now twice. Do You Know Who I Once Was? And I know you're working on a second book that'll go into a lot of your different stories, especially as a firefighter. And I want to get into some of the conclusions you draw, because I think there's a theme of bravery throughout your life, courage and bravery that really comes through when you read this book and when I get to know you. But you mentioned something I want to follow up on. You mentioned seeing a therapist. And I believe is the term gender dysphoria that would be the condition that you were going to see the therapist for. Are there things, Cami, that if a parent, are there red flags you can witness in a child or young adult that are signs of gender dysphoria?
So yes, there is a very well-known term now, it's gender dysphoria, and it is something that, with kids being as knowledgeable as they are today, they know about trans people. They have kids that have identified as trans or perhaps gay, and so it's not as unusual to hear. And kids are not afraid, these days to tell their parents, I think I'm in the wrong body. I think I'm actually a girl or a boy, and start to question it at a young age, and may not want to understand gender dysphoria, but they have to. They're really caring and loving and an understanding of their child. They'll take the time to do that. And that's why today, for me, it's important for me to be a strong advocate for the trans community. Just recently, I was fortunate to do a TED Talk. It started out as a TEDx talk here in Park City, And then fortunately, Ted, the main company, picked up on it and liked it. And it was interesting in that most TEDs are a single person telling their story. And certainly I could have done that, as I'm doing now with you. But we had a 16-year-old transgender man on with me, a high school student, who I had met earlier and knew, Chase, and he's just a great kid. And the TED Talk is called Transgender by Generations. And the whole idea was to use the fact that I'm 67, he's 16. He has started his journey as a transgender person at a young age. He actually had transitioned like 2 years ago. And the obstacles that he faces as a young transgender man. It's not easy, but I will say this, that when you start at a young age like that, you have a much greater opportunity for people to get to know you, to accept you in a different way. And, a lot of my resistance from friends and some family came from, 60 something years of knowing Tom. And some degree, many of them didn't even understand how could you be transgender? You don't even remotely come across as transgender, and it's like my sister wrote in the book, she did a forward, and she said, I never expected to get a call from my 62-year-old brother, my good-looking, outgoing, I was good-looking as a guy, sorry, no, athletic and charismatic brother as transgender. How is that possible? And, it was possible, and people do it. And, for younger people, they don't have to go through those struggles and hide it like I do. And that's why I've gotten into this whole world of what I call my Cami Talk. Right now, I'm serving on the board of Transgender Education Advocates, which is out of Salt Lake, and I'm serving on the board of Encircle, which is a nonprofit LGBTQ organization that builds homes all over the West to, for families and kids and people to go to help them understand about their situation. And also just recently got asked to be the co-chair of the Park City LGBTQ task force to the local community better understand the community, who we are, and not just trans folks, but the whole community. And, we're excited to be hopefully doing some great things in that regard and helping Park City people understand.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned one, I think, very important thing people should know, that just because you're trans doesn't mean you're gay. As you said, you're heterosexual. Your preference is for women. Those are different, being trans and your sexual preference. What are other things that people who are open-minded, they're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, what are things that maybe they're not exposed to a lot of trans people, but these are things they probably ought to know that maybe they don't know?
Well, I mean, if you hear of someone who's transgender, a friend perhaps, or an acquaintance, I think we all are looking for some acknowledgement of that in a positive way, if possible. It's very easy for people to misgender a trans individual, like, for example, I work as a greeter at Park City at the ticket booth, and I take care of people in the mornings. And, many times people say, yes, sir. My voice is kind of masculine. They're not focused, and they're just thinking, oh, this is a guy. And, when you identify someone as potentially trans, walk carefully with it. Try to ask the question of transgender. All of us are going to have an answer, and my answer would be, yes, I am, and I prefer the pronouns of she, her, and hers. Please try to respect that. Some people, will still refer to me as Tom, very few. And it's at a point now after this many years, especially if it's someone that I know, that I'm gonna probably try and steer them into calling me Cami, and just acknowledge it. Try to be polite and understand that I prefer to be called Cami. And then there's also things to ask and things not to ask, a transgender person. And if the person wants to share information, then they will. And if they don't want to share it, then they don't share it. And, it's up to them kind of to break that ice a little bit. Or, I can remember you and I, when we first met, having the conversation and me openly willing to share with you, where I'm at in my transition and my sexual preference of being heterosexual. And, just jumping back to what you mentioned, there's sexual identity, which is, are you heterosexual, lesbian, homosexual, binary, non-binary rather, and then there's gender identity, which is male, female, transgender, non-binary as well. So they don't, necessarily all come together simply. You can have a lot of trans people that do prefer to be with men, and then there are some that don't, like myself. And it kind of goes all over the spectrum. So I think that's another thing that people should be aware of when they meet somebody trans. I think we all want to engage. We want to be visible, or most of us. And it's not a bad thing to be inquisitive. Just because.
Absolutely. It's great advice. I mean, it's you have to be equally brave in terms of being curious and compassionate at the same time, it feels like. Are there other, you'll have a lot of folks within the K&L Gates firm listening to this and thinking, how can I make my trans colleagues feel more comfortable in the workplace? I mean, you've been in workplaces that were obviously very much akin to a large law firm, a big publicly traded company. You were the CFO. What are things you would tell people to be sensitive to their colleagues, to open up, to make them feel welcome and included and treated with equality in the firm?
Well, you're talking about inclusion, which obviously in a big firm like yourselves, I'm sure there are training classes and sessions that your people are going through to try and understand how to make people more inclusive and, to keep, social equity on the forefront of things and to recognize the differences in gender. And, I think we've made huge steps, especially since the Me Too movement and people respecting, the opposite sex. And back in my, when I was in business, I mean, unfortunately, there were things that were going on that you knew were wrong. And nowadays, it's not right at all. Look at what Cuomo's going through right now in New York. And you have to be aware of gender differences and identity and how you respect people and how you treat people. And it's all to the good. It's all going to provide for a better workplace. If everybody kind of gets along and, you walk into the break room or to an office and, you can share your thoughts and ideas with other people. And, it's a question of just being cognizant of the person, treating them with respect. And, that's all transgender people want is the same rights as any white privileged individual might have and feel that they are, on the same playing field as them and deserve the same opportunities. There should be equal opportunity. If you and I were competing for the same job in your firm, okay, just because I'm trans does not mean I should be excluded from that opportunity. Let me prove to you on my merit that I'm capable of doing it. And, I think we're all looking for that inclusion wherever we go anymore. And to some degree, it comes from confidence. I mean, I do my Cami talks and I talk about, people taking risks in their lives. And certainly someone who's come out as trans is taking risk.
You look back, do you think that you could have lived your entire life and not come out?
Yes, I probably could have. I mean, if it came down to Terry saying to me, this isn't working for me, or, this is when we, at this point, if she said it, I would understand and we probably would just go our merry way. But, back in those days, I probably would have said, well, man, I don't want to lose her. I can keep playing this dual role of Tom and Cami occasionally and, doing that. So I think, to some degree, I probably would have if I was forced into it. Now it'd be virtually impossible for a couple reasons, but, certainly it would make it difficult. And I wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
And I don't think she would put me in that position because she sees my love for what I'm doing now, my advocacy and trying to help people. And, I have had opportunities to talk to many high school kids and younger kids. And when you make a difference and someone tells you, thank you, Cami, you're making a difference, it really means a lot.
Let me tell you, because I've seen it in action and I've seen how you put people at ease who may be stumbling, maybe not familiar or comfortable interacting with somebody. I mean, you're, 6'2", 6'3". I mean, you can see people deal with it awkwardly and you put them at ease and you put such a wonderful accepting, you project onto others. I've watched it, that acceptance that you want to see other people show, which I think is beautiful. Knowing you now as well as I do, I wonder if, you're on the front line, so to speak. I mean, Caitlyn Jenner comes out. That was really 6 years ago. This is a progressive trend in our society that is relatively new. I'm not saying gender dysphoria or trans is new, but the public acceptance, having a president of the United States yesterday acknowledge trans rights. I mean, it was so beautiful for many people to hear that. Was the courage that you showed. I mean, you're a person who went into burning buildings. You're the son and now daughter of a man who risked his life in World War II for his country. You were the first CFO of a publicly traded ski company. I mean, there's a legacy of courage that you have. And I wonder if you look at people and say, wow, they may not quite have the courage in this society in 2021 to come out. How do we as a society not require the level of courage of a Cami Richardson and let people come out if that is in fact what they should be doing? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question. When people say to me, that what I've done is courageous, it's humbling. But on the same token, I also realize that I'm just trying to be me. And probably my personality may set me apart from others who are in a similar situation. And they lack that confidence to speak publicly, to be out there in the public domain, as I am. I see hundreds, if not 1,000 people whenever I work at the ski resort. And, quite honestly, it brings me great pride and joy to be out there. And, I've been called the mayor of the canyons. I mean, they all know me. I've been there for 23 years or something, and they all now see me as Cami. And so for me, the courage aspect is way up beyond that. I'm living my life. I'm comfortable. But a lot of trans people really still struggle. They don't have that type A personality. They're timid. They are afraid of what people might think of them and your appearance. And, I try to present myself always in a positive way. I try to always look as good as I can look as a 67-year-old trans individual. But those are important things that some people may not have that skill and ability, and they struggle, And
Yeah.
I know I am very lucky and privileged to be living in Park City in such a liberating community. And all I need to do is drive down to Salt Lake City and see what's going on down there with some trans individuals. And I realize that I need to be that advocate. I need to help those people. And one way I can do that is to try and educate people about the trans community, and hopefully there'll be a greater level of acceptance.
Yeah.
We got pushed back pretty far while Trump was president in what he did towards the trans community, the military issue and other health issues. And so with Biden now being president, I think we can move forward again in a positive way. And, we're still fighting all these crazy issues in states with transgender youth and transgender medical for youth. It's almost hard to imagine that states are putting laws in effect that will negatively impact these trans youth. What are we doing when we don't recognize that the youth is our future? And they're already way ahead of, where we think they are in their knowledge base and how they interact with other people of their age. And, I hope that, over time, the level of acceptance for our community grows and becomes more commonplace. I can look back and think about, back in the 80s when I was a firefighter and how gays were viewed. They were fighting this fight, the same fight that we're fighting now. The gay community has gone through, and now there's a much higher level of acceptance of the gay community. And the trans community is fighting those battles right now. And that's why for you to ask me to do this podcast and to be visible and for people to hear my story it's so rewarding. And, I really appreciate you doing that.
Well, the honor is totally mine.
You're making a difference. And I hope that, the folks in your workforce hear my message, come out of it with something good, and really, can benefit from it.
Well, they will, undoubtedly. I remember you saying one thing to me that made me pause. You said, you see me today, and I'm happy and I'm comfortable in my own skin, but I probably had a different personality when I wasn't out. And I think, that concept of finding who you really are and being free to be who you really are is such a profound concept for it's really the definition of inclusiveness, that we make everybody feel comfortable being who they are. And you're such a perfect example of somebody who is flowered, given the incredible support of Terry, your wife, and your family, but the way you impact people every single day. And I'd love for you to tell, maybe this would be a good way to wrap up, story of the canyons where you met a woman and her daughter. Could you share that story?
It was my first year as a greeter, and I really enjoyed doing it. It was a little bit different job now. Now we actually have to work physically. We, give tickets to people because, you can't sell tickets. You have to do it a certain way. But it was the last day of the season, and I was working. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I saw this mother and this baby who was about 18 months old, it turns out, walking towards me. The sun was shining behind them. It was just a beautiful picture. And so, as I always try to do, to make conversation, to welcome people, I did that, and we entered into a conversation, and the child was really sweet and cute, and I was high-fiving her and things like that and chatting with the mother. And after about 5 minutes, I wanted them to move on. They weren't supposed to be talking with me. And so I was wrapping up the conversation, and I said, I can only hope that someday when your child's old enough to know what it means, that you can tell her that she met her first transgender person at 18 months old. And the mother stopped and looked at me in the eye, and she said, well, I am right now as well. And I got in the car at the end of the day, and I thought back on that. And my mission is and will be to help people understand the trans community. And I can honestly say that standing in the snow, in the cold, that whole winter, I met my goal that day by talking to that mother and child and realized I'm doing just that. And
yeah,
it's a great feeling.
Now, I've told you many times you are making a difference in every interaction you have, and there aren't many people who can speak such a beautiful message of love and acceptance that you speak. And it's a real honor to have you on the podcast, to get you to share your story, which has so many other facets I would love to get into. We may have to do a part 2 down the line, but just to understand the impact you're making and the courage you've shown your entire life. And it's a consistent theme. That's what I texted you. I think you probably recall when I was reading your book. Your story is one of courage, and it's one of heart, and it's just a total honor. I know that the people listening are gonna love this, and I look forward to being an ally with you in the effort to promote inclusion in our society. So thank you, Cami, very much for being here today.
Greg, thank you. You're a bright light in my life right now, and it's been great getting to know you. You're a really good person. And when you meet good people in life, even though we're skiing down a slope, you know who you're with, and you know who you can trust, and it's my honor as well. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.